Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I hope the weekend was a great one. Let me start with macro thoughts. The mighty Yuan has closed this strong twice since May. We're currently trading at 686. I'm expecting it to strengthen to 650 and then to 6.25 because I think underpinning this phase one agreement is a currency grand bargain. Onshore renminbi and offshore renminbi both break through 685 and we've now backed up a little bit. We're currently at 686. It is the most important currency to watch, in my opinion, as I said on the 13th of August last year. I was reading through an FX weekly review that Andreas Steno issues, and he says the Australian dollar should arguably be one of the main beneficiaries within the G10 space should the current renminbi momentum prove sticky, which I expect it to do. The Australian dollar is yet to celebrate the phase one deal in the same manner as the renminbi. And I tend to agree we're going to have a reversion in the Australian dollar, and I like the Aussie and the Kiwi, and this is a further affirmation of that from Andreas again, showing you the widening gap between the Aussie, the Kiwi and Asian PMIs, and they tend to track each other. Therefore, as I said previously, I think the market is too negative about this phase one deal. This is, in my opinion, an entente cordiale and suits both sides at this time. Home thoughts, I return to Carlos Fuentes, the Mexican writer, who's really quite tremendous. And he says this about death: we live in an age that is ours, but we are also the ghosts of an older age, as well as the foreshadowing of an age that is yet to come. Let us not lose sight of these promises that death holds. This is from a photograph from Uduni, Diani's annual kite surfing competition, which was held over the weekend at Nomad Beach Bar and Restaurant. And this photograph I took from, I think, December 2014, when my daughter Layla was learning to windsurf on that very same beach, which really is one of the best in the world. Have a look at this photograph, Good Morning from Lake Bogoria. This photo is from Hobo Piba via Kenya Pics. And I haven't been there, I'd love to visit. M.B.Z National Park, which I've visited several times. This photograph is from Ganam Sami, Kenya Pics again. And the final photograph has ostrich in the foreground and elephants in the background. And it's one I took a few years ago in the M.B.Z as well. And then finally from the M.B.Z one evening, there is this lake, which is like a prehistoric lake. And it was early evening and quite, it was quite sort of strange, the light and the impression that I got. Political reflections, Greek Foreign Minister Nikos Dendias showing Marshal Haftar of Libya a painting of Ottoman ships being destroyed and sunk to the bottom of the sea by the undefeated Greek navy in 1912. Interesting message he's seeking to send the Marshal, because of course Turkey finds itself on the opposing side. This is the Battle of Hellas, December 13, 1912, an oil painting by Vasilios Chatsis, depicting the Battle of Hellas and painted during the Balkan Wars. As I said in my second article of the year, it's been very cinematic in stream of consciousness in 2020. I was referencing Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather via Nassim Taleb and Apocalypse Now. And finally the shooting down of PS-752 out of the night sky a couple of nights before the luminous wolf moon. Philip Giraldi has written an article, Who Targeted Ukraine Airlines Flight 752? ? The claim that Major General Qassem Soleimani was a terrorist on a mission to carry out an imminent attack that would kill hundreds of Americans turned out to be a lie, so why should one believe anything else relating to recent developments in Iran and Iraq? He says the Iranian missile operator reportedly experienced considerable jamming, and the plane's transponder was switched off and stopped transmitting several minutes before the missiles were launched. The SA-15 Tor defense system used by Iran has one major vulnerability. It can be hacked or spoofed, permitting an intruder to impersonate a legitimate user and take control. Joe Quinn at SOTNet also notes an interesting backstory to those photos and video footage that have appeared in the New York Times and elsewhere showing the Iranian missile launch, the impact with the plane and the remains after the crash, to include the missile remains. They appeared on January the 9th in an Instagram account called Rich Kids of Tehran. Quinn asks how the rich kids happen to be in a low-income housing estate on the city's outskirts near the airport at 6 a.m. on the morning of January the 8th, with cameras pointed at the right part of the sky in time to capture a missile hitting a Ukrainian passenger plane. Some of the people in the street are clearly calling for the goal long sought by the United States and Israel, i.e. regime change. If nothing else, Iran, which was widely seen as the victim in the killing of Soleimani, is being depicted in much of the international media as little more than another unprincipled actor with blood on its hands. There is much still to explain about the downing of Ukrainian International Airlines Flight 752. Well worth reading what he's saying in full, even if you disagree with him. My article, first article of the year, was called The Assassination, and that link is on Rich Wrap-Ups. This is a rare picture of Vladimir Putin looking at his successor. This is from an oblivious geek replying to Gary Kasparov. And that took me back to the December 16 article, The Parabolic Rebound of Vladimir Putin. The highlight of the Libya conference was a moment in the group photo session when participants were apparently baffled because they could not find Russian President Putin. That was via Ali Naka. Trump, I don't know him at all, don't know what he's about, don't know where he comes from, know nothing about him. Speaking about Lev Parnas, but have a look at this video. What a don, and thanks to whoever made the video, Anna Nemtsova. As I said on the 4th of November in an article called At the Moment of Vision, the I See Nothing, the Republican Party will have to make a hard-nosed political calculation. And in that case, I was writing then, Vice President Pence might well be the coming man. Tower Site tweeted this, Beach Boys, Middle East, Lebanon, 1978. And of course, Lebanon is blown up again with a lot of protesters injured over the weekend. I still like this song by Ronnie Saikaili, Revolution Radio Mix. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei says Trump will push a poisonous dagger into the nation's back. He held the first prayer session, led the first one for about 10 years. Iran's supreme leader said Trump is a clown who only pretends to support the Iranian people as he addressed Friday prayers in Tehran for the first time since 2012. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei says Trump will push a poisonous dagger into the nation's back. He said Western countries are too weak to bring Iranians to their knees. The 80-year-old leader openly wept at the funeral of General Qassem Soleimani and vowed harsh retaliation against the United States. 25th of November, I was saying this alliance of Secretary Pompeo, the MAGA tweet army, Mariam Rajavi, and the MEK is just not credible, it's incredible. Now we need to add Reza Pahlavi into that mix. Pretty sure the hashtag Pahlavi represents Iranians is not legit. Formative analysis was just the same. Mark Owen Jones. This is the link of Imam Khamenei leading the funeral prayer for General Soleimani and General al-Muhandis. He also said, we live in a world where the powerful deceive us. We know they lie, we know they lie, they don't care, and nothing ever changes. It's normal. Welcome to the post-truth world. The targeted assassination of Soleimani, for all its long-term fallout, is just one move in the Southwest Asia chessboard, says Pepe Escobar. What's ultimately at stake is a macro geo-economic prize, a land bridge from the Persian Gulf to the Eastern Mediterranean. Trump recounted minute-by-minute details of Soleimani's strike to donors at Mar-a-Lago in his speech held inside the gilded ballroom on his property. He claimed that Soleimani was saying bad things about our country before the strike, which led to his decision to authorize his killing. How much of this shit do we have to listen to, he asked. How much are we going to listen to? They're together, sir, Trump recalled the military officials saying. Sir, they have 2 minutes and 11 seconds, no emotion. 2 minutes and 11 seconds to live, sir. They're in the car, they're in an armoured vehicle, sir. They have approximately 1 minute to live, sir. 30 seconds, 10, 9, 8. Then all of a sudden, boom, he went on. They're gone, sir, cutting off. I said, where is this guy? Trump continued. That was the last I heard from him. Alan Dershowitz is the devil's advocate, as per the New Yorker. Have a read. And this I liked from Seth Abramson, personal favourite, an actual smoky back room with Trump's lawyer. This map shows global trade routes in the year 1490 from Simon German 600, and why I believe in the resurgence of the Indian Ocean economy is seen in that map of his. The Economist is speaking about dethroning the dollar. America's aggressive use of sanctions endangers the dollar's reign. Ever since the dollar cemented its role as the world's dominant currency in the 1950s, it has been clear that America's position as the sole financial superpower gives it extraordinary influence over other countries' economic destinies. It is only under President Trump that America has used its powers routinely and to their full extent by engaging in financial warfare. The results have been awe-inspiring and shocking. America now has over 30 financial and trade sanctions programs. On January 10th, it announced measures that the Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said would cut off billions of dollars of support to the Iranian regime. The State Department, meanwhile, said that Iraq could lose access to its government account at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. That would restrict Iraq's use of oil revenues, causing a cash crunch and flattening its economy. The dollar is used globally as a unit of account, store of value, and medium of exchange. At least half of cross-border trade invoices are in dollars. That is 5 times America's share of world goods imports and 3 times its share of exports. The world's financial plumbing has Uncle Sam's imprint on it too. Most international transactions are ultimately cleared in dollars through New York by American correspondent banks. America has a tight grip on the main cross-border messaging system used by banks, SWIFT, whose members ping each other 30 million times a day. Another part of the US-centric network is CHIPS, a clearinghouse that processes $1.5 trillion worth of payments daily. America uses these systems to monitor activity. Denied access to this infrastructure, an organization becomes isolated and usually financially crippled. Mr. Trump has taken the weaponization of finance to a whole new level. Putin talks of the dollar being used as a political weapon. The new age of international monetary experimentation features the de-dollarization of assets, trade workarounds using local currencies and swaps, and new bank-to-bank payment mechanisms and digital currencies. Such activity marks an inflection point, says Tom Keating of RUSI, a think tank. Russia has been busy de-dollarizing parts of its financial system. Since 2013, its central bank has cut the dollar share of its foreign exchange reserves from over 40% to 24%. As I've said severally, in August 2018, I said Trump is relishing his financial warfare strategies. In November 2019, I said he's being a big proponent of coercive financial, currency and sanction warfare, and his policy of maximum pressure on Iran is that policy's apogee. The dollar is a weapon, I told Sputnik, and he's relishing his financial warfare strategies. I don't think it's about to be toppled anytime soon. Dollar index, right at the negative trend line, says the marketeer. We're currently at 97.599. I'm still looking for us to sort of drift off to 94.50. Finally, Trump's aggressive foreign economic policy is the signature success of this administration. It is highly effective. He can keep it up. It's working a treat. Global currency volatility has dropped to the lowest level ever recorded, which is extraordinary, frankly. Let's go back now to the currency markets. Euro dollar 110.92, dollar index 97.599, Japanese yen 110.12, Swiss franc 0.9680, the pound 129.77, the Australian dollar 0.6874, India rupee 71.04, South Korean won 1158.61, the Rial 416, Egyptian pound 15.8456, and the Rand 14.44. Euro dollar, as I said, 110.93. Uber full year results are going to be issued on Thursday. This is a chart from Mosey Hesbon. I am still bullish about Uber, and I wrote about the platform economy before we had a big nosedive in platform companies after the demise of We. And I called it the new high-tech millennial crypto avocado economy exhibits viral, wildfire and exponential and even non-linear characteristics not unlike Ebola. And I said the attraction for investors is exactly that, because they suddenly go viral and you have hundreds of millions of subscribers. Netflix is issuing results today. 23rd of September, I put out a conviction buy when the price was $270. We're currently at $339, and I still think there's plenty of upside in this share. I take you back to something I read in 2012 called Annals of Technology Streaming Dreams. People went from broad to narrow, and we think they will continue to go that way, spend more and more time in the niches, because now the distribution landscape allows for more narrowness. I was saying Netflix is not a US business, it is a global business. The majority of analysts are in the US, and in my opinion, these same analysts have an international blind spot. Once investors appreciate that the story is an international one and not a US one anymore, I said, we will see the price ramp to fresh all-time highs. Netflix 339, this is a chart from Raf Kadian, who says it's risky below 333 and 328, and resistance is at 353. Commodity markets, as I've said severally, the purest geopolitical proxy in the markets is gold. And last year I was saying there's a fin de siècle apocalyptic mood afoot, but I was also saying the conundrum for those who wish to bet on the end of the world is this, however, what would be the point? The world would have ended. Gold is trading at 1561. Libyan oil exports have been interrupted, output may be cut by half. Crude oil, which has corrected 8 points from 65. MP traders thinks we're in the process of forming a possible short-term bottom. We're currently at $59.13, and there seems to be some worry about Iraq supplies as well. Oil versus the S&P since 2017, they tend to move in tandem, although with a lag. The recent melt-up in the S&P and implosion in oil, it makes it start to look interesting, and I agree with that. Looks like palladium found gold. This is the market here. Palladium has been on a tear. It's used in catalytic converters in cars to reduce smog. In just a few short weeks, coffee has gone from star performer to teetering on the edge of bear market territory amid shifting perceptions on supplies in Brazil, the world's top producer and exporter. On Friday, Arabica beans for March delivery capped a third straight weekly decline to settle at $1.12 a pound. On ICE futures in New York, the prices dropped 19% from a December peak, just shy of the 20% threshold that defines a bear market. In the first half of December, a bullish stampede prevailed, with futures surging 50% in the prior 2 months. Brazil's crop agency CONAB reiterated that growers will collect another bumper harvest in 2020, albeit probably less than 2018's record levels. Exports of green beans rose 15% to an all-time high in 2019. It's incredible, because just a few months ago everyone was expecting Brazil not to be a big production. Emerging markets, a shift back to current account deficits will raise Turkey's dependence on foreign capital inflows and potentially destabilize the lira. That's from Robin Brooks. Emerging markets with difficult growth trajectories have tenuous balance of payment financing and volatile currencies. Turkey top left. Again, keep an eye on those two, because it's relevant to my article, The Maghreb, a decade later, and the intrusion of middle powers. I learnt from William Dalrymple in an article in the Financial Times that it was a Berber cavalry commander, Quintus Lollius Iubicus, who after Hadrian's death was sent westward to the furthest and most uncivilized extremity of the empire, becoming the first African governor of Britain. The story of the apex of his brilliant career is told in a second inscription found at the somewhat unlikely site of Balmuldi, just to the north of Glasgow. It was wealthy North Africans who crushed the Caledonian resistance and seized North Britain for the Romans. By the end of the 2nd century, a third of the Roman Senate was North African, while the Emperor Septimius Severus grew up a little to the east in Leptis Magna, now in modern Libya. Modern-day Algeria finally rid itself of Bouteflika, the wheelchair-bound, last year, but North Africa, otherwise known as the Maghreb, remains volatile, and is still yet to emerge from the Arab Spring, which was triggered by the self-immolation of Mohammed Bouazizi on 17th December 2010, which then begat the Egyptian Revolution of 2011, also known as the January 25 Revolution, which toppled Hosni Mubarak and then circled back to topple Muammar Gaddafi, who said, "I tell the coward crusaders, I live in a place where you can't get me. I live in the hearts of millions." With a great deal of help from the merchants of regime change led by Hillary, we saw, he died, Clinton. Interestingly, the advance guard of mercenary head choppers were then exfiltrated from Benghazi to Syria, but their advance was resisted with a great deal of help by Putin, and they are now being round-tripped back to Libya as we speak by Turkey's Erdogan. Tunisia, where it all started just under a decade ago, is in a steadier state. Egypt, after a brief interregnum under the Muslim Brotherhood, has reverted to military rule and lashings of repression, but al-Sisi used the opportunity to reform the economy, and Egypt has been the darling of international investors and the destination for the best carry trade in the world for a number of years. Since 2010 and over the last 10 years, middle powers like Turkey, the UAE, whom Mattis characterized as Little Sparta, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and Turkey, Israel and Russia too, but they cannot be characterized as middle powers, have all extended their reach into the Maghreb and the Horn of Africa. The schism which started in the Gulf has spread like a virus. I remain a little surprised that the UAE and Saudi Arabia have not visited economic warfare on Istanbul, because it does look ripe for the plucking, but then Al-Thani is probably providing a backstop. The New York Times has an article about Mohammed bin Zayed, and it reads thus: "The driver pulled up outside a building where Clark heard popping sounds. He went inside and saw a group of women in military uniforms firing pistols at targets. Seated not far away was M.B.Z. in his white tunic and ear protection muffs, alongside his wife and an empty third chair reserved for Clark. During a lull in the shooting, M.B.Z. introduced the women, who were all his daughters and nieces. 'I'm starting a draft,' M.B.Z. said. 'I want everyone in the country to feel like they're responsible. A lot of them are fat and lazy.' To stimulate the draft, he said he would begin with all the young people in his own family." And how the UAE approached Sisi and outlined the terms of their financial support before Morsi's overthrow. "I think there's every reason to believe he staged a coup," I was told by one former diplomat. "For a tiny country in the Persian Gulf to overthrow the ruler of Egypt and put their guy in, that's a big achievement." The main theatre for proxy operations is Libya. Gaddafi characterized Libya as a cork, and he said to Tony Blair that if he was toppled, Libya and Africa would be uncorked. It was a prescient prediction. On one side, we have General Haftar, a dual Libyan-American citizen who is the commander of the Libyan National Army and is bankrolled and supported by the UAE, Egypt, France, and Greece. On the other side, we have the Government of National Accord, led by Prime Minister Fayez Sarraj, and supported by Turkey and Qatar, because they have been joined at the hip for a while now. President Putin started on Haftar's side, but likes to play a balancing role and might well eventually align with Turkey. Germany is currently holding a peace conference this week. The US is sidelined other than making the odd phone call. Libya is clearly an example of geopolitical cliff edge risks. The Horn of Africa exhibits entirely similar characteristics. In fact, from the Maghreb to the Sahel to the Horn of Africa, we're witnessing a surge in asymmetric warfare and the intrusion of middle powers. I take you back to an article I wrote in October 2011, Gaddafi's body in a freezer. What's the message? In that article, I was quoting the crowd in Tunis, who are not afraid, we're not afraid, we're afraid only of God, the crowds chanted in Tunis in January, a few days before Tunisia's Zine El Abidine Ben Ali fled. The article to which I'm referring in the New York Times is linked there as well. I think there's every reason to believe he staged a coup. Footage allegedly showing Syrian rebels in a jet getting transferred to Libya in support of the UN-backed government in Tripoli. This is a short video. The link to Dalrymple's article on the treasures of Algeria. Libya is Moscow and Turkey's land to divvy up unless the US steps in, but Trump unlikely to bother, says AM Live Mon. This is a photograph published by the Kremlin, Berlin International Conference on Libya. And then Ali Naka asked, does this picture say to you Libya conference? Which I think is a valid point. China's trade with Africa grows 2.2% in 2019 to $208 billion. Imports fell 3.8% to $95.5 billion. Exports rose 7.9% to $113.2 billion. I've written about this pull effect. China has exerted the power of pull over a vast swathe of the world. And over the last 2 decades, we can call it the China, Asia, EM and frontier markets feedback loop. And I was saying this feedback loop has been positive for 2 decades, but is now beginning to reverse somewhat. And I think the trade deal will also be bearish for Africa, in that China is best off buying a lot more oil and oil product, and that will hurt places like Angola. I reference you back to FOCAC 2018, when Xi Jinping specifically spoke of the end of vanity, which I characterized at the time as a substantive linguistic recasting of China-Africa by Xi Jinping. Malawi in turmoil as Judgment Day looms. Mail and Guardian. Malawi anxiously awaits the results of a constitutional court case that could nullify last year's presidential election. Popular resistance to President Mutharika is growing more strident, precipitating the country's worst political crisis since the return to democracy in 1994. The police station, this is describing a no-go area called Musundwe, close to the main marketplace, is in ruins, ransacked, vandalized, burnt by a community that has effectively revolted against the current government. Prisoners inside were released when the building was torched several months ago, and the town and the villages which surround it have become no-go areas for police. Long-standing local grievances against this government were crystallized after the presidential election in May last year, which was won by Mutharika and his Democratic Progressive Party with 38.57% of the vote. Chekwera and the Malawi Congress Party came second with 35.41% of the vote. Now it's all before the Constitutional Court. Arguments have been heard and the country nervously awaits judgment, which is expected in early February at the latest. Mutharika has reacted to the popular unrest by going to ground. After being sworn in for his second term, he stayed for months in Blantyre, despite the presidency being based in Lilongwe. The size of his security detail has been greatly increased, and he now travels with an escort of armoured military vehicles, but in interviews he has remained defiant and attacked the opposition as bad losers. The unrest in Malawi is not limited to Musundwe, with Mutharika faring poorly in both the centre and northern parts of the country. Sustained protests have left his government under siege. and the economy in a tailspin. There are three possible outcomes of the impending court judgment. Firstly, a ruling in favour of the incumbent will result in major political upheaval. Secondly, a ruling in favour of the opposition will lead to major resistance on the part of the governing party. The third option of fresh elections may provide the solution, but without major reforms in the law and to the constitution, nothing will temper the situation. Until the judgment is delivered, Malawi remains in political limbo. A lot of people are expecting the courts to nullify the elections. This is a photograph of Lake Malawi taken by Nchenga. Rwanda's economy is expected to grow by 8% this year and in 2021. Upside risks to growth are a continuation of strong private investment, more regional trade and growth payoffs from large public investment projects. They are very sharp, they really are. South African oil shares up 3.36% year to date, dollar rand at 14.44, Egyptian pound firmer at 15.838, EGX 30 down 0.31% this year, Nigerian oil share best performing in the world up 10.34% this year, Ghana Stock Exchange down 0.74% this year. Al-Shabaab militants from Somalia may have received help from Kenyans for the deadly Manda Bay attack, says the Military Times. US Africa Command officials believe that Al-Shabaab militants from Somalia crossed the border into Kenya to conduct an attack on US and Kenyan forces earlier this month in Manda Bay with the assistance of facilitators within Kenya. We assess that these are Al-Shabaab coming out of Somalia, but with the support of Kenyan facilitators and potential Kenyan aspirants of Al-Shabaab. We also assess that after the attack, they're continuing to make their way back into Somalia as well. They are on the inside. The Manda Bay attack is the first Al-Shabaab has carried out on a US military installation inside Kenya. The French private equity fund Amethyst Finance is set to acquire a 30% stake in local retail chain Naivas. This is the video footage of this event that happened where Mr. Owino, an MP, is accused of shooting a disc jockey called Evolve. Watch it yourself. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. George Orwell, 1984. As I said, it's been very cinematic in the stream of consciousness in 2020. Kenya 10-year and 30-year Eurobond issued in 2018 are unchanged at 5.8% and 7.5%. The 2019 7-year Eurobond is at 5.6%. and the 12-year Eurobond at 6.7%. Cumulative diaspora remittances increased by a marginal 5% in the 12 months to November 2019 to clock $2.8 billion from $2.7 billion, which was slower than the 40.8% growth recorded in a similar period of review in 2018. That's Iran's caused by the expiry of the amnesty. The NSE is trading at a PE ratio of 11.8 and a dividend yield of 5.7%. With that, I shall take your leave.